Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, and my co-host Rob Branton are joined today by Ernie Daniels, President and CEO of the First Nations Finance Authority, and Kristan Straub, President and CEO of the Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation. The FNFA has issued more than 4 billion Canadian dollars in debentures since 2014, all backed by First Nations' own source revenues with a near zero default rate and investment-grade credit ratings. The Loan Guarantee Corporation, backed by 10 billion Canadian dollars in federal guarantee capacity, has already deployed its first guarantees, including a $400 million commitment supporting 38 First Nations acquiring a 12.5% equity stake in a major gas transmission pipeline. In our conversation, you'll learn how these two key institutions are working in tandem to unlock Indigenous equity participation in infrastructure at scale, why the FNFA's borrowing pipeline has doubled to 2 billion Canadian dollars in the coming year, and what the guarantee structure means for international lenders and co-investors looking at Canadian projects.
Well, Ernie Daniels, President and CEO of the First Nations Finance Authority, and Kristan Straub, President and CEO of the Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation. Welcome to a very special episode of Drumbeats from the London Stock Exchange studios, where we held our recent Canada Indigenous Investment Summit, the third. So welcome and thank you for taking the time.
Yes, welcome. Great to have you with us again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, really enjoy the opportunity, the conference that you guys put on. Thank you very much for putting the conference on and offering the opportunity for Canadian Indigenous groups to connect with capital markets that are beyond Canada. So, well done.
Thank you for that. Of course, we're grateful, and we've built this platform for the Indigenous people of Canada to speak to the international capital markets directly with no barriers, and that's what this is about today. But you both represent critical organizations in this financial framework that Canada has built over the years. And I think, Ernie, no disrespect, you're an elder. You've been on this journey for a number of years, and we are so honored to have the FNFA as our first Indigenous sponsor at the summit. That was, for all of us, Rob, myself, and Siwan and the team, very special, because that says, I guess, we're doing something right. So thank you for that. But why don't you talk a little bit about your roles and explain to our audience over here in the UK and beyond exactly what the FNFA is and what the CILGC does.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're really happy to be here again, like I said, and happy to be, the first Indigenous sponsor to the summit. I was here last year. I've seen what potential there was, and the progress that's been made in the year. It's fantastic. So to be a part of this movement and be a sponsor, one of the first, the first Indigenous sponsor, meant a lot to us. It's a place where we need to be, really, because the FNFA is leading the way, I think, for Indigenous organizations, First Nations in Canada to access the capital markets. So the FNFA is a debt issuer. We operate under federal government legislation called First Nations Fiscal Management Act, which was First Nations led. So First Nations pursued this access to capital. That's how it all started out. And at the time the act came into force, it was targeted more for property tax revenues that First Nations were collecting, mainly in Western Canada. And it was easy because with property tax revenues, you can increase and you can your tax from your ratepayers, and there's a lot of structure to that. But in 2011, a really important piece of legislation got added to the Act in the form of a regulation called other revenues regulations. So First Nations then could use all other revenues other than property tax. And that's what really started FNFA when it really took off. So all First Nations across Canada then were eligible because they do have other revenues. And at the time when we were developing this regulation, we did a regression analysis and looked at what the borrowing capacity of other revenues was with the First Nations at the time. And so this, you're going back to 2011, and we estimated the borrowing capacity at $6 billion. Wow. Well, we're going to hit $6 billion in the next year.
Yes.
And
so what's the latest estimate of the borrowing capacity?
To date, we've issued $4.3 billion. And so that's since 2014 when our first debenture went out. But the forecast that we're looking at for the next year is $2 billion. So that's a little bit more than $6 billion. So it's pretty dramatic. The growth, if you look at the growth chart of First Nations loans with the FNFA, it's gone up dramatically. It's good. It's not leveling off.
Yes.
It started out really slow, but then its uptake is gone up really high. Mainly because First Nations are not used to working with a financing model like the FNFA. So the FNFA is structured a lot different than what First Nations are used to. They're used to going to the commercial banks and borrowing that. So they have short-term interest rate loans and lots of collateral. And so with the FNFA, when we came, we do long-term fixed rates. We've issued bonds now in the 5-year term, in the 10-year term, and the 30-year term. We are looking at longer terms, but I'll talk about that once we actually have something that's really, that we can talk about. Because in this, where we are now, we're noticing that a lot of projects are coming to us, and there's partners, and they want to keep those things quiet. So we have a lot of NDA agreements that we sign, and so we can't really share a lot of information. But the uptake for First Nations and really accepting the model of the FNFA has been pretty good in the last year. We just keep hitting milestone after milestone. It's a mixture of a lot of really, really good things. I always tell individuals that I've talked to that don't know much about us, this is the First Nations' own revenues that are backing this debt. It's not from government. Government is not giving support to the First Nations to leverage capital. It's in the way that they're doing it through this vehicle of the FNFA. So I think when you keep that in mind, it shows that First Nations are invested in. They do want to access capital to undertake the projects that they need to undertake that really improve the lives of the people in their communities. So, if there's more vehicles that they can look to for accessing capital in the way that they want to, because it's really up to them how they want to do it, then it's good. It's great. Because it is about the community. It is about the community making those choices and looking at the investments that they want to look at.
Kristan, you're the new CEO of a new organization. We talked at the summit about some of the things that have changed in the last 10 to 15 years in Canada, and if we tried to hold a summit like the one we did, if we tried to do that 10 years ago, we probably could not have pulled it off, definitely not in the same way. One of the new things is your organization and the $10 billion of capital you have to deploy. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we exist today in a unique space within the investment environment for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, Indigenous groups at large or Indigenous nations at large. We've only been around since 2024 when the first $5 billion was committed to loan guarantees. Our corporation has been stood up now for a little bit better than a year, probably a year and 3 months, a year and 4 months at this point in time. We've been very fortunate to have a couple of deals come forward for us that are represent the spectrum of the things that we can do. One of the deals is Project On is a large deal with 38 nations on a gas transmission pipeline, where we have a $400 million guarantee that's out there. And another one is a small deal that's done with a couple of First Nations on a hydro transmission line in and around the $20 million range. So the limits of our program are really between $20 million and $1 billion in terms of the scope. But like Ernie mentioned, we're available and in a position to support nations that want to make investments for equity investments in their lands or their traditional lands. And because of some historic and actual legal implications that prevent nations from monetizing assets or putting assets up as collateral on reserve or associated with reserves, our ability to guarantee those under a commercial agreement and a commercial business agreement. So we will back commercial banks that are lending to nations to invest in projects, and we consider all spans of projects. We heard about we've talked about just regulated projects like gas pipelines, like electrical transmission, but we have the capacity to do it in real estate. We have the capacity to do it in other extractive sectors like timber, fishing, as well as mining and critical minerals. So we have a large opportunity to invest across through there. And I would be remiss not to speak to the forerunners and the forebearers of the groups that actually started the financing opportunities for First Nations, like FNFA. Some of the work done by First Nations Major Project Coalition that identified this gap that exists today for Indigenous groups to be able to take investment and equity stakes within projects that are being developed within their region. And so that's the tool that we've really been enabled to put into action today. And I would say within the first year, we've developed a very healthy pipeline of projects that are coming out today.
What can you tell us about the pipeline number, breadth, across the country?
I certainly can. We've got a great spectrum across Canada, and a credit to the team that has stood this up, which has largely been through CDEV, the Canada Development Investment Corporation. The team that has initially stood that up. And now we, as the Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, are building our own people and our own organization to carry that forward. But if I look on a yearly basis, I think our team last year led 350 different meetings. I mean, that's almost a meeting a day.
Yes.
Between Indigenous nations, between corporations, between banking groups that are all interested in investment. And we have a healthy portfolio of opportunities that sit out there that's somewhere in the range of 40 to 50 opportunities that are not yet into deals in diligence. And then when we take that down to deals that are in diligence today, there's 4 to 6 deals that are out there. And I say that because in some deals, there's a stop-start process as we work out what the right financing structure is. So we continue to advance them, and sometimes there may be a couple of hurdles that we have to get over before that deal continues on and goes through. But for folks, would really like people to understand is that we are here to work at the speed of business and work at the speed of banking, and to ensure that nations have the understanding that we can work at the speed that enables them to accompany business and banking institutions at the rate and at the pace that is required for loans and for those equity transactions to happen in a timely manner, for assets to be either capitalized as new assets under construction or coming in, or the purchase of assets that are existing assets in an equity transfer during a recapitalization of a project.
A lot of excitement in the market. And just I want to come back to the innovation that was set this up, because this was not the benevolence of the Canadian government, right? This was the Indigenous people saying, you've got us on reserves, we can't borrow against them. And the Indigenous people fought to set up this framework under the Fiscal Management Act to set up these structures that now are coming to fruition. And all of a sudden, it's not just, we can work with the FNFA. We now have the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. They're out here building their businesses and talking about the opportunities, and it's no longer having to deal with the same organizations in the past who might not have been supportive. And banks anywhere, they're running a business and trying to make money, whereas you're actually enabling the assets that have been not necessarily stranded, but difficult to access. So these nations can take advantage of these opportunities. So they have that capacity to seize the opportunities in front of them now.
Yes, that's correct. When you look back at the FNFA and how it's been structured, it's a work around the Indian Act. It's a sectorial governance initiative that First Nations wanted to have in place, really to get access to capital, really affordable capital. And so if that's the goal, well, we've achieved that tenfold. And I think it's the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And so there's much, much more to come. Our communities lack infrastructure. We have a major infrastructure gap in our communities. That needs to get funded somehow. And the only way you can do it is with some type of revenues that you have that you can get from investments.
Right.
And so, making those strategic investments that are fit what the community is looking at, because it's really important to have the long-term revenues that can support the loans that the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program will be guaranteeing is really important. So that's one aspect of it. But I always...
Sorry if I can just come back on that so our listeners over here understand. So this was Indigenous people fighting.
Yes.
Because they want to grow. They want to grow their economy for their community, raise their standard of living. So it's nothing about the Indigenous peoples are against development.
No.
They want development. They fought through the bureaucracy to establish these sort of programs because they want out there and to grow their share of the business.
Yeah, exactly. So, when it's First Nation led, First Nation managed, and governed, you got success.
Yes.
So they're really in control of their future, and I think that's what's the real key. Because a number of us leaders, and I'm glad you mentioned. I've been at this for a while, and I feel good about that, and I see where we're going. But we actually lobbied the government really hard for a guarantee program. Then we've seen other mechanisms that could work also. Somehow with monetizing federal transfers, we can address the infrastructure gap. That's one part of the solution, but there are many other elements that have to go into that. It's government, we understand, can't really get the funding that we need to tackle all of our issues. And we would do a better job anyways if we had the resources to do that, as we live it every day. And so, we have lived experience. And now that we're, I can't believe that I'm sitting here in the London Stock Exchange talking to potential investors out there about investing into First Nations projects that will eventually make a better quality of life for our people, and to put themselves in a position where they're managing wealth as opposed to managing poverty through living off of government programs. So the job creation, the economic output, the benefit goes 100% to Canada.
Yes.
And so every dollar that's spent Canada's going to benefit. And so that is really good. We need to be a part of the economy of Canada in such a way that we can, really help our country as we move forward in realizing some of the resources that we have available in our lands to help the changing environment in the world. So that's huge.
It is huge.
Yeah.
They're competing for your business.
And that's a real opportunity for us on the loans guarantee side, because we're a very minimally concessionally form of funding. That means that it's a commercial transaction. So the private lenders, the banks, or others would be willing to invest in it and generate a return out of it. And our ability to provide a guarantee on those investments enables the cost of capital to be lower for the First Nations or the Indigenous groups out there, which in turn increases their return on that project. Yeah. And that's one of the key things. I know, my First Nation, Ernie and I were talking about it earlier, when when our First Nation went out to develop a wind energy project, I think the only group that we could go out and find any financing from was Ernie's group, and they were beneficial for that. And I'd like to think today that with the Loan Guarantees Corporation, we bring a whole new set of opportunities and a whole new set of tools that's out there for other Indigenous groups to be able to take advantage of, marrying the work that FNFA has done and the Loan Guarantee Corporation's ability to issue guarantees, I think is a tremendous development now. And when we look at the volume of capital that's out there to be able to be either guaranteed or in Ernie's bond issuances for him to be able to lend back on to other communities, it's amazing to see that rapid, hockey stick-like growth or exponential growth that's out there. And that's excellent for First Nations, excellent for Indigenous groups, and excellent for Canada, because those loans that go out, whether they're on FNFA side or the ones that are guaranteed by our side, they go out and they're actually contributing back to the GDP of Canada. They're targeted at the projects, whether they be projects that are associated with a major projects office or projects that are important to regionally or nationally with each of the Indigenous groups. Those are all key things for us to continue to work on in advance and accompany the Indigenous groups along in their journey to equity ownership in projects like that. So,
yes. And Kristan, if the law changes like looks like it will later in the year, and FNFA will have a even broader mandate, you may be guaranteeing FNFA loans. But I wanted to ask you about your decision to come to London and why is a federal loan guarantee program coming to London and spending time with potential London and European investors?
So one of the things that we've seen, at least in the short tenure that I've been here, I've been here 3 months, but we've seen several projects that are, I want to say dependent, but the origin of the project is a First Nation-led project that is out seeking European investment, whether that be through timber investment, whether that be through renewable energy investment. So we're already seeing Canadian First Indigenous groups reaching out to Europe for equity and equitization of projects in Canada. So it's an excellent fit for us, and we've had several meetings off-site during this period of time with other groups around here that are willing to invest and come to Canada. And so it's a very interesting and open world. And when we look to the ambition of what Canada has now under the current government and the mandate that the current government has given for Canada to continue to grow and diversify our trade, diversify our investment sources, and in terms of Canadian investment, it's a natural place for us to go, is to come over here to Europe and get access to capital that's here. Whether that be through, as we spoke to earlier on today, whether that be through ESG bond issuances and groups in Europe that are specifically targeting this type of investment, either on the social side or on the environmental side. Those are the same elements that we see Indigenous groups coming back in Canada and wanting to make investments in. So there's a natural pairing of those things. It's not to say that we can't raise the funding in Canada, but it opens and it diversifies and it broadens that access to funding and capital. And the broader we make that, the more competitive it is, and the better it is for Canada and our growth.
Well, whether it's in Canada or outside Canada, I think it's fantastic that we've got government supporting the story that Canada has changed and is open for business and open for investment. It's good to have you part of the team.
And I would say, Rob, just on that last part, it's important to note that we guarantee the Indigenous portion of the loan. So we're not guaranteeing a foreign entity, we're guaranteeing the Indigenous equity ownership on it. So that is Canadian ownership that's being guaranteed by the federal guarantee program.
Well, that's important for everyone to understand about how they can work with both your organizations. Ernie, just coming back, because we didn't mention at the beginning, because it gives you a unique insight in the Canadian economy, that you're also a director of the Bank of Canada. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is my second term. I've just been reappointed, which is good. I feel fortunate that I was the first First Nation person to be appointed to the Bank of Canada, which was good. It's really important to have that perspective. Monetary policy is really the function of the bank, central banks, and and it's no different in Canada. And so, how to make the economy work, and how First Nations could actually, really Indigenous, an expanded Indigenous economy will benefit Canada, as we were talking about. And so having a voice in there, and making sure that the bank understands the issues that we face. I'll give you an example. Like if Canada adopts a digital economy, like how does that impact our nations? How does it impact Indigenous people?
Yes.
So we got to be ready. Other countries where they have those issues have addressed that, and people are starting to use QR codes for deposits now, for donations and so forth. So we got to move to that area, and so it's an education process that the bank is undertaking right now to look at that. And the other thing, and it's an issue that we have right across the country in Canada, is that the information, the data is really inadequate to measure how we're progressing with economic development, or even with the Indigenous economy. So we need to put that in place. So that's something that we're working on as well, is standardizing how we measure success. If you're setting up certain goals, like with the Indigenous loan guarantee, they have goals that they want to establish with the guarantees that they're going to make to Indigenous borrowers for a certain project. It's impact. Like, how do you measure that? And so we need to work on that. That information has got to become standardized, and so I think that could be another institution-led something to work at.
Yes. Is that specifically on the Indigenous economy? Because
yes,
there's gaps you hear in the UK, you hear in the States, the information's not as good as it used to be.
Yes.
But we're not talking about that same challenge across all. We're talking about the Indigenous people and the Indigenous economy, which is, I think, growing at double the rate of the rest of the economy,
right,
and has huge potential. That we don't seem to have a good handle on what's really going on. So that's an urgent situation.
That is
right?
an urgent.
'Cause the money's coming in now.
Yeah. So how do we, because that's one of the things that the Bank of Canada does, is they do an economic update.
Right.
So why can't we do an economic update? And that's what's important, because once we do that and that information is available, our people are going to feel really good about the contribution we're making to Canada. And because I always tell our politicians that every investment, every dollar that you invest with us, you're going to get it back tenfold, and that's reality. And it translates into jobs that are created.
Yes.
Economic. I want to give you another example. So. Member 2 First Nation is a very successful progressive First Nation in Eastern Canada and Nova Scotia. Chief Terry Paul, who will be inducted to the Canadian Business Hall of Fame later this next month, is the chief of that community. But they're located next to the municipality of Sydney in Nova Scotia, and the jobs that are created for the people in Sydney is a lot. I even heard it was almost 50% of the population there.
Wow.
So if that's the case, well, 50% of that population have to buy houses. They have to buy cars. They have, buying that. So that spill off into the other parts of the economy is real. And so that's what happens when First Nations really get successful and get economic self-sufficiency. They create opportunities for all Canadians. Yeah.
Win-win.
Yes.
We heard throughout the investment summit that Indigenous economy is growing at somewhere between 9 and 21% over the last history of the last number of years over history. one of the things that I find really impressive out of the work that FNFA does and then the new work that we're doing in other groups is that while there are billions of dollars on the table, there is still a significant gap to be made up and through there. So it's incumbent upon us to each work collaboratively as we go forward to not duplicate efforts, to ensure that the efforts are deployed across and writ large across Canada, so that we have the ability to close the gap between the have and the have-not nations that are existed out there. So there still remains a lot of work to be done on that aspect. From a growth perspective and the ability for nations to participate. So.
Yes, and as we're talking with that relative gap to the average Canadian, it really hasn't changed over the past 10 or 15 years.
I think the gap has even increased. Yeah, relative.
It's even worse.
Yeah.
But if you're in the UK or in other countries, you're always looking at that gap. How do we raise up? Because if we raise up, the whole country benefits. Yeah. And this issue came out earlier today in our discussions, and that's a huge opportunity that the whole country will win if that is raised up, because that just has knock-on effects.
And it certainly goes to the point that Ernie made earlier on measuring the efficacy of whether it's FNFA, whether it's Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, or other programs that are out there. But to your point on and this is not an anecdote, it's an actual. I was speaking with one First Nation group, and better than 10 years ago, they were indicating that 90% of their funding that came to the community was federal funding that came in support of it. And through investments, through loans through FNFA, through guarantees from our corporation today, as the chief had mentioned, going forward, from today forward, 90% of their revenue will come from own source revenue, and 10% will come from federal. And when you think about that, the opportunity that's in front of many nations today, that's a tenfold increase.
Yes.
So when you talk about closing that gap from an economic perspective and a social perspective, that to me gives the Indigenous nations that are out there agency over where they put dollars, how they spend dollars. They're no longer tethered to a federal contract that is supplying the minimum requirements to what they need, but they can now move up and begin to develop and grow and provide sustainable growth and sustainable resources for their community and their community members. It's a powerful example.
It changes the mindset.
It completely changes it. It completely does.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're managing well.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's the transformation.
Yeah.
And the opportunity is what we just talked about. Becoming a part of the fabric of the Canadian economy, contributing to that GDP, at least in excess of our percentage of the population of Canada.
Yes.
So that's got to be the goal for us. And so that's what I look for. We're pieces to the puzzle here. Mm-hmm. And so we're filling in that puzzle pretty quickly. And as we realize the power of leveraging capital in the capital markets, and that's why we're here today. It's really to attract that capital into our communities to really make a difference for the people in that community. Because as I keep saying over and over, if you make a difference there, the Canadian economy is benefiting. And I would think that globally there's effects as well, because if we're getting the minerals out that can produce batteries for electric vehicles, better the how they're built and how they run. Mm-hmm. Well, it's globally, and so we have a small part to play in that in Canada, because we have a lot of resources, and so really happy to be a part of the solution, and really happy that this summit has been created. You guys did an amazing job 3 years ago coming up with the idea. It's just because you got to bring people together. Back home, like when we're in Canada, I have a hard time meeting with him. But here I can actually meet with him every day for the last 2 days.
Yes.
And so
maybe even share a pint at a pub or tea over. Yeah.
Well, it starts with conversations, right? And you come up with we were talking earlier. It's amazing. Like we're sitting down talking, all of a sudden we start talking about an issue, and then how can we attack that issue? How can we come up with a solution for that? And that's what's great about it, having a a forum like this where you're bringing people together that want to share ideas. And so I'm really happy to be a part of this.
Great. Well, I can confirm you're making a difference. Ernie, you and the FNFA are making a huge difference. Kristan, your organization too, brand new, but a lot of capital power, and you're making a difference, big difference too.
And likewise to Ernie's comments about being here in London, it was striking to me to see Chief Tammy from Lac La Range and Chief Achni Peniscum talk about both individuals born on the trap line, born on the land, and speak about their personal experiences and their history of harvesting fur and fur being delivered back here to London and then coming back full circle from a traditional perspective to be back here today, looking at how do their communities today come back and still provide and gain access to capital markets in London and also deliver services and materials back into the global economy. Both of those chiefs, amongst other chiefs, as Ernie had highlighted, but across Canada, they're taking the ownership today on the natural resources and leading in delivering, whether it's energy projects, critical mineral projects, transmission projects, and timber projects across Canada today, and putting Canada back on the map in terms of our delivery to our allies and our trade partners.
We had a few chiefs, and Chief Tammy Cook-Searson, who just won her re-election for the 8th time, was joining us for the 2nd time, and it was a real honor. But it's been an honor to have you both with us, to take a time out, and thank you for all that you do and the differences that you're making. Nyawa.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Great
you. We've really come full circle.
Yeah.
We have. You have.
Thank you.
Thank you to Ernie Daniels and Kristan Straub for sharing their insights with us. And thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.